So I just finished watching Rick and Morty and I have so many thoughts. Just wow. This last series, this is obviously going to contain spoilers, so this is your official spoiler warning. Don't watch this if you haven't watched it and you want to watch it. And this will also make zero sense if you don't watch Rick and Morty. I have really enjoyed this season. I think it's been really intelligent and really interesting and a really fascinating insight into Dan Harmon's personal life. I don't want to pry too much, obviously. So I have some thoughts on the last episode and on the arc as a whole. I'll start with the arc, that makes more sense, right? A lot of people I know have complained about this series because Rick seems like more of an asshole, and I actually really like that because it feels more honest. Rick is a sociopath. It's mentioned a lot, but not in the kind of jokey I have sociopathic tendencies way, like in Sherlock, where it's clear that really Sherlock is probably just autistic. Rick is a full-on sociopath. I really like the fact that he has been portrayed as more moral, as negative in this series. Rick and Morty has gained a very large cult following, and a lot of the people who watch Rick and Morty think they identify with Rick and think they're as clever and think they're as edgy, and basically the first two series kind of glamorized the sociopathic element of Rick. You know, they glamorized the fact that he thought that everybody else's lives were expendable and worthless and that human connection is meaningless and that, everything is meaningless. And I agree with that to an extent. I'm a nihilist. I definitely believe that there is no meaning or inherent value to anything at all. But for me, that is separate. That doesn't mean you shouldn't care about it. Just because something is meaningless doesn't mean that you shouldn't be bothered with it, you know? For two series, we've had this guy basically be glorified as like a god, and we've seen him be a douchebag to his family and not really face any consequences for it, and not really be demonized for it. Now, Dan Harmon's gone through a divorce, and I really think that is reflected, because whilst I don't think Rick is a self-insert by any means, I think that he is an attempt to give insight into the way his mind works, because he's a genius, very obviously, and he has sociopathic tendencies. All you need to do is watch that really good Dan Harmon documentary, I can't remember the name of. Harmon Town, that's it, I completely forgot. Harmon Town, where you go on tour with him and he talks about fighting with his girlfriend, and he says that, I don't want to misquote him, so I'll put a link in the description or something. It's on Netflix, you can watch it really easily, but he says about how when he's in an argument, it's like any sense of sort of sympathy is just removed, and his sole aim is to beat the other person down and to make them feel like an ant, and that's how he sees them. And then it's glorious tears. That's literally what he says. And he kind of delights in it a bit. I think it must be difficult because he very obviously both loves and hates that aspect of his personality, as I think you would. And I think it's a very common thread in autistic people, in people with psychopathic and sociopathic tendencies, is this duality of, on the one hand, I love the fact that I don't get attached like these normal peons do, and the fact that I can be cold and removed from a situation because it means that I can achieve more, but on the other hand, I end up hurting people that I care about because I don't know how to express to them that I care about them, or I end up screwing them over because I don't have empathy. I am a neurotypical, by the way, so this is a neurotypical perspective. That does, change my argument. But yes, I have really enjoyed this series exploring the negative part, because it's kind of pulling the rug out from the particularly male fans who think that they're just like Rick Sanchez because, they're really clever and they get all of these nuanced references in Rick and Morty, and it's suddenly being clever isn't everything is what I've got from this series. Maybe that's just me being a hyper emotional kind of person, but this entire video is entirely subjective, so don't take my word as gospel, obviously. What else? Yeah, I remember I watched that final scene with Jerry and the bit where Rick and Morty talking about Jerry and you see the kind of the mania. You see how multi-layered Rick is, and you can see the sociopathic tendencies coming out. I really like that bit because it kind of shows the multiplicity of Rick's character, which is that you never know when he is telling the truth, and that's what makes him fascinating as a character. That's what I really enjoy about the writing, is you never know if he's being genuine or not. Some people, depending on what your kind of emotional leanings are. Some people might watch that episode and say, oh yeah, well, he's lying at the end to Morty. He didn't actually use Morty and Summer as pawns, as in, like, you know, he didn't just bring them back so that he would have Beth's trust. He actually does care about them, he's just saying that now. But then other people would say that the thing he says at the final scene is him truthfully, and that he doesn't have any attachments to Morty and Summer, and that he was just using them as leverage to get back into the household and then to kick Jerry out and usurp him and become, like, the alpha. And I really like that, because nobody knows the answer. Possibly not even Dan Harmon, because once you've created something as art and put it out there, it's open to interpretation, so you can argue that even the artist doesn't have final concrete explanation of what the character's motives are. Oh yeah, I have to say, before I said this to one of my friends and she completely agreed with me, is that there wasn't enough of Jerry in the series. By that, I don't mean that I like Jerry, although I do think it's really interesting the way we view Jerry and Rick, because Jerry is not a good person. As a character in general, I don't empathise with Jerry, from his mediocre aspirations to his questionable morality and his willingness to throw other people under the bus just so he can get out of confrontation and pain. He's not a nice character, he's not a good character as what we would define as good. And we all hate him for it. But neither is Rick. Rick isn't a good character either. He's unquestionably not a nice person. And I think the difference between our attitudes probably stems from the fact that Jerry pretends to the entire world that he's this nice guy, whereas Rick is just out and out, I'm morally ambiguous, I don't give a fuck, I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want, I'm the god of my own universe. And I think in that, from my interpretation of that, is Dan Harmon basically going, yeah, I know I'm a bad person sometimes, but fuck, at least I admit it, and that it's better to be morally ambiguous and open about that moral ambiguity than to pretend you are a good person and still do things that hurt other people and that are essentially bad choices and bad actions, which I think is interesting, and I think I would agree with that to an extent. I absolutely adored Pickle Rick episode. I just thought it was great. I thought it was really interesting how he'd rather nearly die than go to therapy, and I really liked the whole quote, I don't have it all here, using the intelligence to justify sickness. I think that's something I resonate a lot with, being like, you know, with the whole tortured artist idea. Rick's inability to just carry out general maintenance and self-care because it's too boring, I think is a potential problem of a lot of geniuses, and because they believe that to be like a mundane task. And it is a mundane task, like self-care is boring as shit. Exercise and going to sleep and brushing your teeth and eating healthily, it's all boring as shit. But we've all got to do it because we all live in these like weird ass flesh containers that we've got to look after for some reason. We can't just be floating corporeal ideas. I loved the apparent, this is another thing, like going back to the idea of layers and Rick's layers of truth-telling. I love the moment of vulnerability. In the episode with the Vindicators, there's that moment of Rick saying, you know, there's the final bit, Rick saying, oh, you know, maybe it's you, Morty, like, maybe it's your respect, oh, when I get drunk I get emotional, and maybe it's like maybe you are what I value, means that he does believe that to a degree. He just keeps it well hidden, but then the fact that it's actually about Newt is just hilarious. Like, a lot of people I know were like, oh, I hated that bit, but once again, I really enjoyed that because I thought it's once again kind of portraying Rick as a bit more of an asshole than he has been in previous series, because there's not even that hint of affection which we neurotypicals will latch onto and view him with compassion. We can't, and that's what I really enjoyed about this series in particular, is the constant pulling out of the rug, that constant lulling you into a sense of security, because that is the sense of security we're given whenever sociopaths are portrayed in media. It is, you know, lulling you into the sense of security that actually deep down they do care, deep down they do work exactly the same as you, which is not true. Sociopaths have a lot to offer to society, and I think that they shouldn't be demonised in the way that they are. But to say that deep down they work in the same way as you and I do is not true. Their brains work in a different way. We should just respect that and accept that, instead of trying to find a connection with characters by being like, oh, they care, they really do care. No, they don't care. That doesn't devalue them as people. But I really like that. I really like that lulling of of, yeah, no, deep down, Rick really does care, and then, oh, no, it's about this random character that you see for like 3 minutes, and the whole reason for his attachment to Newt Newt is essentially because Newt Newt admires him and laughs at his jokes, and that's it. I just like how frank and honest Rick and Morty feels this series. I just really enjoy it. Another thing to add, this is gonna be like a cutaway, because all of my previous thoughts about the series so far are gonna be me in one set of clothing, and this is me in a different set of clothing. Filming on different days, because I don't have time. I really enjoyed in the Whirly Durly Conspiracy the scene where Beth like enlarges herself and inside out herself to like try and talk to Summer. I thought that was just such a beautiful way of doing it, because Dan Harmon is autistic. He's not going to be able to empathise with, well, I mean, broadly speaking, I don't know, he hasn't said this explicitly himself, but like, from what I understand of people on the autistic spectrum, he's not going to be able to empathise with a mother and a teenage daughter discussing body image. And for any writer, it's going to be hard to do that conversation without making it really fucking cheesy, tip and like cliche. You know, it's gonna be, oh honey, you're beautiful inside and out, and blah, 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 all of this crap. And I just thought that enlarging the situation literally and turning it inside out so that they're speaking to each other in gobbledygook, and they're these two huge monsters just talking to each other in gibberish, had such a profound emotional effect for me, I think. Like, I watched it and I was like, oh mum, I miss you. It really absolutely conveyed what it was trying to say, and it just, I mean, the Jerry adventure was cool and everything, but that bit really stood out to me. Okay, I'm gonna go away now, because I have a rehearsal I need to get to. But you're going to see me in literally 2 seconds when I come back, presumably with a change of lighting state, and finish this video off, because there's so much to explore here. There's so much that I want to talk about. Lighting change and costume change as well, because I meant to film that later in the evening and then it ended up actually being the next day. I have a lot more thoughts and probably need another 20 minutes to condense them, but I only have 5, so I'm going to try and get through as much as possible, but there may be another lighting change in this video. I apologise. VEDO and a degree is quite a lot of work. What else did I enjoy? I enjoyed exploring Jerry. I think I said this earlier, but I really wanted to see more of Jerry. I really liked Jerry. Not as like a person, or even as a character, but I thought he added an interesting dynamic, because you had an antagonist to Rick. You had someone directly railing against Rick. And it's really interesting because the past 2 series it's been like, fuck Jerry, like he's being an absolute dick for no reason. And then this series it's kind of been like, oh, actually he kind of had a point. I mean, he went about it in a super douchey way, in a super cowardly douchey way. Rest and relaxation was one of my favourite ones because of the, like, oh, it was just so good. The bit at the end where like he's listing all of like his toxic traits, and he's like, your entitlement, your narcissism, your crippling loneliness, your emotional attachments, and I just think it's so interesting. See, he sees all of that stuff, and those are the parts of himself that he hates, so it's nice that we got to see the wall that's going on inside Rick, in that there's like a logical, rational side of him that's completely cold and detached, and then the emotion side of him is just so intense. It's just all of the emotions, but it's not always positive ones. It is this kind of godlike feeling, but also that he's got like serious emotional attachments, and he really loves his grandkids and his daughter, but he sees that as a weakness. I thought that was so interesting. That was cool. Yeah, the fact that he wanted to remove that from himself. I might stop this early, just because the next part of this video is going to be all about the last episode, and I feel like it might make it a bit more kind of coherent if I do the big old switcheroo when I talk about that, so I'll just switch now. Right, final part of this video is the final episode. It was a very different tone to what I was expecting. Like, if, you know, the end of series 2, it was very fast-paced, very action-based, and ended on a cliffhanger. And this one did as well, but not as much. And it was a really, really, like, the actual content of the episode itself wasn't great, I didn't think, but it was a lot about the interpersonal relationships, which I like. That's my thing. I wrote some notes, like, whilst I was watching it. I've just written Commander in Queef, because that's my favourite line of all time, ever. So there's a few things that's touched on in that last episode that I think were really interesting. Beth's inability to be content. When smart people get happy, they stop recognising themselves. I kind of related to that in that she completely overthinks and overanalyzes everything. Technically, she could be a clone, she could not be a clone. We can't really have definitive proof. Sure, Rick has said she's not a clone a bajillion times, but you never know, she could be. And I think whether she is or not isn't the interesting thing, it's her grappling with it and watching her freak out by overanalyzing her own behaviour is something that's so relatable to me. I really enjoyed the kind of internal conflict that she had and the internal struggle she had. I thought the scene with Jerry was really interesting, and I don't know how I feel about it. Generally because I'm definitely an optimist, but when it comes to relationships portrayed on screen, I like it when people who aren't meant to be together stay broken up, and whether Beth and Jerry are supposed to be together or not is irrelevant in this. I just thought it was really interesting that they ended up getting back together, and what Dan Harmon was trying to say at that point, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to try and project meaning onto that. I just thought it was really interesting that is what has happened. You start to have a real genuine sympathy and empathy for Rick. In the last sort of 5 minutes when Morty has said he's not, that they are hiding from him. In those final few scenes, it's really telling in the way that Dan Harmon sees himself relative to other people around him, because if he's projecting himself through Rick, it's clear he sees himself as kind of a destructive force. I thought that was really interesting. The fact that, we all think it's funny and interesting watching Rick and Morty go on adventures, but Morty's kind of growing up a bit now, and he's kind of being no, fuck off, and is kind of reeling from the psychological damage of having a sociopathic grandfather, and the whole family is. But at the same time, you can't help but feel really sorry for Rick in that moment, because he just assumes, he said his entitlement was one of his toxic behaviours. He just assumes that he's going to be going back to his family, as most people would. They're all no, we are hiding from you. We don't want you in our lives, because they know that he is emotionless enough to be able to just shoot a clone of his daughter, which I think most neurotypical people couldn't do. There's an awareness that the family didn't really have in season 1, definitely, that he's not afraid to just shoot a clone because it's become self-aware and it can't exist anymore. And the fact he brings a gun and he's like, oh no, I was going to kill Jerry, is hilarious and morbid at the same time, obviously, because he hasn't thought it through from an emotional person's perspective. He's thought it through from a rational, entirely logical perspective, which is the usurper here is Jerry. When Jerry is gone, my family will have no reason to rally against me. And then Beth comes out, and I don't know what makes him just kind of chuck the gun on the floor, because he comes with a fully loaded gun, and Rick's not the kind of person to do that for show. It's interesting that she maybe managed to appeal to a more kind of humane side of him, where he just admits defeat and is like, for fuck's sake, Jerry, how the hell do you manage to do this? I'm so much better than you. And yeah, I just think it's a really interesting way to end the series. It's obviously not a very climactic ending, but where can they go from here? That's what I'm really fascinated in, because if you look at the arc of this series, we started off the series with Rick at basically the highest status he's ever been. He's taken down the Federation of Ricks. He is the alpha in his family. He's got Morty and he can go on adventures with him. He's got the respect of his daughter and his granddaughter, and he's just booted out the one person who ever had a bad word to say about him. And now we're at the end of the arc, and the king has been dethroned, and it's just so interesting. I've really enjoyed this series because of the ability to explore the other characters. I've enjoyed seeing an unrestrained, darker Rick, properly darker, not just this guy is a sociopath and it's really funny. We really kind of fetishize and romanticize people on the autistic spectrum, psychopaths, sociopaths. What Dan Harmon is doing is essentially self-representing. And I think that's so healthy, and exactly what we need neurodivergent people representing themselves. So instead of getting this cardboard cutout idea from the media showing the complexities of it, I'm really glad that we've been given an infinitely complex character to grapple with, and that Rick and Morty is becoming so much more of the part of the public psyche. I hope that it incites questions like this in people. This might be my favourite series, to to be honest. Exploration of character. I think I'm a bit of an unusual viewer because a lot of people I know who like Rick and Morty are INTPs, and it's very weird. I have a very INTP taste in film and television because I spend a lot of time with them, and they all recommend their like film tastes to me. And for that reason, because people usually you watch what you relate to, and I can't really say, except with the exception of Beth with the existential crisis, because that is me, I can't really relate to any of the characters super strongly. I'm very much on the sunshine and rainbows end of the spectrum of personalities, but I find it really interesting because I like questioning my own perception of reality, and I like seeing how other people see the world. I think it's interesting, and I think it's worth looking at, because I shouldn't just assume that everybody sees the world in the same way that I do. I had a lot of thoughts, and I think that this is the sign and the mark of good art, is it makes you ask a lot of questions, and it also gives you a lot of answers, well, it guides you towards answers yourself emotionally, and makes you feel things. I think that's like, those are all marks of good art. And I think anybody who thinks that Rick and Morty is like pretending to be cleverer than it actually is just looking at the fan base as opposed to the actual content, because the actual content is just brilliant. It's not faultless, but it's brilliant, and I think Dan Harmon is a genius. I'd really recommend watching Harmon Town if you're a fan of Rick and Morty, because understanding the man who wrote it puts Rick especially, but puts the whole thing into context. Oh, as a side note, I loved the bit where Rick was sitting there like, you know, do autistic people like this game? And Morty's like, why would you say that? He's like, 'cause I'm starting to love it. That direct kind of nod to the camera, I just loved. I just thought that was brilliant. That's about everything I have to say, I think. So I will leave you there. Happy VEDO, I will see you tomorrow.